Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to another episode of Beyond the Alert. Today I'm speaking with Alan Carter, former Director of IT Security Operations at Gilead Sciences. Alan, thanks so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Anne. I'm really happy to be here.
And I already pointed out before we started recording that you have a fantastic background. So we'd love for you to share with our guests a little bit about your cameras.
Yeah, photography is my first love. Still do it to this day. And the old cameras are tactile. They're objects of art, sort of. So they're fun to have up on the wall behind me and in my little office. It's just part of my world.
Yeah, I usually compare things like that to books versus a Kindle. I cannot bring myself to read anything on a Kindle.
Yeah. Oh, the books are all to my left, and then they're very disorganized and ugly, so they don't make a good background.
I can say the same on my end. All right, let's dive in. So you built and led security operations at Gilead Sciences for over a decade. What's the biggest misconception leaders have about what it actually takes to run an effective SOC?
Certainly, there's always the aspect of technology, and there's always the idea that the tech can be what you need. And I think that the truth is that you do need high quality technology and capability, but you also need a really good staff. And during my 10 years at Gilead, we went through all those changes where we really invested heavily in technology, and that was a great investment. But especially as things grew, you needed to increase the quality and sometimes quantity of staff to really have the human capability. And so I think that's always the biggest misconception, is that more tech means better. It's important, it's vital, but the human aspect, and we'll talk more about that as we go along in this conversation. It's a lot of what there is to talk about with automation and AI.
Yeah, and from a marketing standpoint, I can see that as well. The more tech and platforms we have doesn't really help beyond this. There's a point of diminishing returns if you don't have the people to really use that tech.
You could have too much. Yeah.
For sure. So you recently wrapped up your tenure. And what are you focused on now, and what prompted your transition?
Yeah, I was really fortunate to have 10 years at Gilead, and I built 3 teams while I was there. Security Technology Operations, which is the large team that manages our tech platform. As we invested heavily in technology, we had a whole team to operate that. Vulnerability management, we took over all of the patching for the enterprise. Certainly, we had always done vulnerability assessment. So the vulnerability management team was another relatively large operations team, and then the SOC. And the SOC came at a time halfway through my tenure at Gilead where I was really combining the leadership capability I'd had with these other teams, but also my past capability I'd learned at NASA. So at 10-year point, Gilead had a retirement benefit that said that you would have some cash at 10 years. And I said to myself, well, I'm not ready to retire, but how could I use that? And would a sabbatical be a good thing? And so I was kind of thinking that way. And I think the universe heard me and gave me a little kick in the pants, because a few months before my tenure, Gilead had a major reorganization, and they laid off quite a lot of director level people. And, there are a lot of good corporate reasons for that. These things happen. But they gave me a severance that was probably better than if I had taken the 10-year retirement benefit. So I have been on sabbatical, and I've been starting this fall to look for new roles. It was really great after a long career of really full steam ahead to take a break. I never had the opportunity to do that before. And so what I'm looking at is things that would leverage a lot of my prior skills and experience, but perhaps be more focused. As a director at a large organization, you are sort of by nature pulled in a lot of different directions, and maybe sometimes spread too thin. Maybe that's the nature of the beast in leadership. But to find a gig that is somewhat more focused, and then I always look for a mission, something that gets me out of bed in the morning. So after this sabbatical and after the 10 years of experience at Gilead, I'm really open to finding new things, and it's a pretty exciting time.
Awesome. So out of those 3 different teams that you ran, where do you see yourself in your next role? Do you have a preference?
Certainly, advisory type roles would be good for me because of this broad experience. I do think that in a leadership capacity in this day and age, certainly the need for ongoing SOC leadership is key. And so a lot of the roles I'm looking at are in the SOC or cyber fusion center space. But I really dug vulnerability management. It's a core it's a core practice. It's what everybody needs and still is not done well at a lot of organizations. So if a conflict company really needed good vulnerability management, I could really sink my teeth into that. And that would be, I was talking about a focus, sort of a single practice. So there's a lot of that. And I think I could focus in a lot of these different areas.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's at leadership level, it's really tricky. You mentioned something interesting to me, which is the spread too thin part. Love leadership. I often find myself scrambling from one thing to the next. You can't really enjoy the moment ever because you have to quickly context switch and move on, right? So, spending 15 years in government security operations at NASA before moving to pharma, what lessons from that experience still guide how you build security teams today?
Oh, so many. As I mentioned briefly before, my last job at NASA was in they had built a new nationwide SOC for the agency. And as we staffed it up and we're running 24/7 in California, we realized that the challenge was going to be not only keeping our graveyard shift people active and energized, but also helping people grow. And so I started to work on a program. I was the training manager for the SOC, and the idea was to develop an institutional system that people would be constantly learning, constantly growing. They would constantly have a known ladder of advancement. And they could get off the graveyard shift at some point, or they could stay with it if they liked it. But that particular lesson about institutional training, about really making it part of the culture, was super valuable. Beyond that, a lot of what was fascinating at NASA and what really drove me was this sense of mission. A lot of the work I did at NASA before the SOC was in aviation safety, keeping airliners from crashing. And that was a real mission. It's something that gets you out of bed in the morning. And so across my career at NASA, there was quite a few opportunities to have that kind of growth. I think the other thing that I definitely learned at a federal agency and it's a research and development facility is working with stakeholders and the ability to communicate what's going on with IT and security so that, a PhD in something or other who's a researcher can understand the dynamic, or a leader who's a civil servant who might have been in accounting and is now in IT can understand what's going on. So that ability to work with diverse stakeholders, especially people, all my career I've worked around super brilliant, educated people, but not necessarily people that had that background in IT. So the government aspect and the research and development aspect certainly benefited me in the healthcare startup I was in and at Gilead, where you have these brilliant scientists that are focused on curing diseases, and they have to stop and pay attention to things about IT security. How could your clinical trial be impacted by a breach? And so that ability to communicate with really diverse stakeholders I learned that at NASA, and that was certainly invaluable.
Which is interesting because you have to find that common language, right? So you're on the same level, but to do so, you really have to dig into the other person and their role and background and understand kind of how do you level set them, right? And keep them also interested.
Yeah. Oh, in the aviation safety film, I was working a lot with retired pilots and retired aircraft controllers, and just lots of people in industry, and they had their own lexicon, and that was a really, really fascinating time.
Cool. I've only looked at the aviation safety piece from a birding standpoint and Smithsonian and all the feathers they have to try to identify what flew into a plane and how to avoid it in the future. Different approach. So, what was your approach? You sort of answered a piece of this to building a high performing technical team in an industry where the stakes are obviously incredibly high and downtime is just not an option.
I think that ongoing training and mentorship across all my teams, I had very different people in all my different teams at Gilead. Part of the thing about high performing, it's a term that's used a lot. If you don't define the performance parameters, it's hard for any group or any individual to be high performing, to be seen that way, to be evaluated that way. Otherwise, it's nebulous. So certainly defining what the goal is, defining what good is vastly important, so that team members from the various the entry level people all the way up through senior people have that in mind. This is what's needed. So goal setting, working towards those goals, mentoring people to advance, delegating well leads to high performance teams, because you can't just have the important stuff done by a few people. Usually it wouldn't be done as well. The term diversity is bandied about a lot, but in a team, you've got anywhere from 5 to 100 different brains, and you figure out how to leverage those individuals and work with the variety of capability that you have. So I think part of that dynamic of setting the goals and understanding what high performance is helps people to figure out how they fit in and helps you understand their capability. I think that part of it is key.
You mentioned the pharma company was a startup. In startup world, I find a lot of times that the founders are really afraid to let go of the reins and they tend to be overbearing. So when you have you define what good looks like, what is success to that next tier, and you provide the mentorship. Two interesting questions came to mind. One, how often do you check on their progress while you're mentoring them? I'm assuming it's throughout, but do you have, quarterly check-ins or something? And then the second part would be, how do you convince a leader who's not used to letting go and trusting, right? Because to your point, if you have those important tasks, you have to have an amount of, yes, I've validated they know this type of detail or information and they can handle it if I give them a reach. But you also have to take a bit of a leap of faith, right?
Yeah, it is the quality of your oversight. I definitely separate mentorship and performance management or people management separately. In performance management, it is measurable stuff. It is looking at, how did you do on this? How's that going? Did you meet these goals? In mentorship, it's how can the person improve themselves to do these things and what are their challenges? How do we overcome individual things? And they go together. You don't get the opportunity to mentor every staff member, whereas you should be looking at the performance of every staff member at some level. The aspect of delegating and getting sort of buy-in to do that from upper management, that is a challenge, although it trickles down through me. So if the management has confidence in me and I have confidence in this person, that should be clear. And it is a little disconcerting when somebody in management says, "Oh, you sure you should have Fred do that?" And I'm like, "Do you don't trust me?" Because it should go. That's the chain of command. And then you realize that you may have to overcome something with your relationship with that leader because it does go through you. And there's a level of autonomy you need to be able to delegate. But then there's that trust going upstream. Sometimes it's simply a matter of reiterating the qualities of that worker, making sure that upper management either knows their capabilities or knows how they've grown. And that's often really beneficial to that worker. If somebody above me then recognizes, oh, Fred is really good at that. So it's an opportunity to provide that upstream information.
Yeah. So I suppose you have to know what you're getting into when you join a company to see if there's that ability to build trust and have the whoever's above you build a really relationship with you where you're their trusted advisor, right? Otherwise, it's much trickier.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's all about relationships for sure. And that's key. I was really fortunate at Gilead to have a leadership team that was in place the whole 10 years I was there. We started very small, almost felt like we were a startup within a very large, successful organization, which often happens when a company grows and is very successful. Sometimes certain divisions like IT or IT security lag behind. And so when I started in 2015, it really felt like we were a startup and we were a small team. Now it's huge necessarily, but having that continuity of leadership was great. Really made a big difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. So during your time leading SOC operations, how did you balance pushing your team to keep pace with threats while preventing burnout?
That is key. I was really fortunate that my first deep SOC experience at NASA was focused on that, was focused on training, employee improvement, and employee opportunity. It wasn't just we wanted them to be better, we wanted them to feel engaged in the work and continue to be enthusiastic. And so all along, all my teams, and certainly on my SOC team, we ended up with a very large global team with folks in India and the UK and several locations in the United States. Very, very diverse team. And the key was to pay attention to the stressors. Certainly sometimes it's obvious. You've had 2 weeks of chaos and everybody's burned out. Sometimes everything's going along fairly normally, but you need to realize that some particular groups or even individuals are struggling or having a hard time or burning out. I always relied on managers. As the director of the SOC, I had a couple of sort of team managers. They were kind of like the coaches that could tell you, who on the offense and who on the defense was struggling with a twisted ankle, to use a sports metaphor, and to really build those relationships throughout the team. I had one really good leader in India and one in the United States who part of their job was paying attention to the individual people. They had more opportunity to talk with individuals on a day-to-day basis than I did, and to make sure that role of sort of paying attention was always delegated as well. Beyond that, the training and the enablement gives people things to look forward to. Sometimes people see bringing on new technologies, like several years ago when we were adding SOAR capability to automate a lot of our repetitive alerts. People really liked that idea and felt it was going to make their jobs better, but the work itself to onboard new technology and to work out the kinks and get rid of the false positives was very hard for people. So making promises about improvements and then following through on them and actually, ringing the bell, having a celebration, hey, we've done this, that kind of thing it gives people something to look forward to. Sometimes people see bringing on new technology as a disruption, and it always is, but they have to be able to see the other side of it and know how it's going to improve their work, improve our security. So yeah, there's a lot of paying attention to do. That is challenging when you have multiple teams. We used FTE staff that reported directly to me that were employees, and a managed detection and response team that did commodity detection, and then a managed security service team that provided staffing for our offshore SOC. So 3 or more different teams directly involved in the SOC, each one with their own types of burnout. And because 2 of the teams were contractors, were not employees, working with their management to address these issues and to make sure there was parity, that, you don't want your MDR team to be totally burning out and your other teams to be great. You have to pay attention to all those levels. So working with vendors, working with MSSPs, making sure that they understand your goals for employee education, employee retention, employee satisfaction, because they're not always thinking about it the same way you are. So really keeping each person as a member of your team. In our case at Gilead, each person was a Gilead security team member, regardless of who their paycheck came from.
Which is great because it builds a lot more collaboration as well.
For sure.
You did mention the people working the night shifts, if they were willing to give those up. So I guess your team culture was good enough for some of them to want to stay put in that night shift?
Well, it's a challenge running a 24/7 SOC just in North America. You just don't have the time zones. And so we always had a few people that, whatever the reason that they liked the night shift, what we discovered was sometimes they liked it because they felt they didn't have to perform as much. Their choices were more limited. And if they were doing well at the work and were satisfied with it and didn't look at advancement or didn't want to take on more, this is 15 years ago, they would stay in that worker bee role. Other people did want to advance. They did want to move out from the dark time. There were a few people who liked the night shift because they could just focus without distractions. And one of our main threat hunting people was a really brilliant guy. He liked to work nights because nobody would bug him. He was an excellent individual contributor. So it does take all kinds. But what we didn't want it to be was to seem like a dead-end job. We wanted people to advance. And especially as you identify the people that are capable and really smart, you want to be able to keep them moving, and you want to be able to leverage more of those brains rather than what would now be an automatable task. Back then, 15 years ago, there was a lot of people doing things that now would be fully automated.
Fascinating. Okay. So when you were hiring for your SOC at Gilead, what qualities mattered more than certifications or technical skills?
Oh, communication skills for sure. And it's not eloquent verbal or beautifully written. It's the ability to connect with somebody and really talk to them, communicate with them, to not hold back. You don't want wallflowers. You want people that will raise their hand and say what's going on. So communication, I would say maybe not communication skills, communication ability. That in any IT career is key. It's the difference between advancing and not advancing. It's the difference between being a key contributor and one of the team. So I'm always looking for people that have that ability. To some extent, it's the ability to not be intimidated by upper management, to speak up. So for me, that's critical. They've got things going on in their head that nobody else has. Each person's individual, and you want to hear from that. So communication's key. I think that looking at a variety of people, I've worked a lot with ex-military people, and I like to have people who have that background in a security team, but I also like to balance that with people who come from really different backgrounds. So one of the things I look for in IT security, and especially in SOC, is people who have a deep technical understanding of IT. somebody who's gone to school to learn how to be a SOC analyst and has certified as a SOC analyst, has never done anything but a SOC analyst, may not understand what's going on in the network, may not know about kernel-based stuff. They may not have enough deep IT knowledge. So I always look for people that really understand how computers work and how networks. That's the more important thing, how networks work. I'm like, how does that message on your phone get to you? You know, especially for a young person, that's a really hard question to answer. So finding people that have an understanding, a technical understanding of how computers and networks work is key. You can understand how security technology works. You can get certified in security stuff, but if you don't really understand IT, you're not going to be as effective. Especially since the commodity stuff is now automated, you need people that really understand what's going on to be able to find the weird stuff. And that's what the automated things don't do, is find the unusual things or the organization specific things, the platform specific things.
So as you look for your next role, is that a concern for you with all the automation to, what will happen with the future because people haven't gone through those different roles and had the experiences to understand the background?
Well, automation has always been the ability to take repetitive tasks away from people to make them faster and more reliable. And now that we have much more deep and sophisticated automation with large language models and AI, the challenge will be, how do we make people as effective as we need them to be? And again, training has a lot to do with that. With SOC teams, if we realize that people need more ground level understanding of technology to do, say, a threat hunting job, to analyze unusual threats that the automation system doesn't get, then we have an opportunity to do more training. And quite often, the ability to have people have more time on their hands rather than doing repetitive tasks means that one of the things they should be doing is training. Definitely working in the industry and in pharma, research and development. These are very unusual organizations and have a lot of non-commodity threats and non-commodity alerts, a lot of very unusual IT systems. And for most companies, there is always a percentage of your work that is not commodity. The commodity stuff, a standard EDR threat on a laptop or something, that's the kind of things that your managed detection and response team, your automation, all these commodity things can be and should be dealt with efficiently. But there's always, and it varies by the type of industry you're in, but especially in my work, half of what we do is so unique to a pharma company and then so unique to Gilead itself or any company. And when I was at NASA, the same was true, that what you want to be able to do is spend time with the people that you do have to make them really effective. I guess you could call it institutional knowledge, but it's what are we looking for? And one of the things I worked on a lot over the last several years was insider threat. And that's an area that's there's a lot of understood parameters to insider threat, but each individual doing something malicious is unique. And so that's one of those things that isn't necessarily a Russian threat group. It's not necessarily somebody coming in from China. It's somebody in your organization. So those types of things that are very specific to an organization is where we'll be able to focus more if we have really good automation, if we're taking the commodity stuff, and if the automated systems really provide you quickly with the anomalies. If an automated system is really able to say, I don't understand this, here's all the data I have, will you please look at that? Boy, that's great. Because not only is it taking care of the things it can take care of, but it also then provides you with all the knowledge to effectively assess the issue. And so the ability of an automated system to support individuals in their investigations is part of that key. And then to have people who can really do those investigations.
That's a really good point.
One of the topics that I had mentioned in talking to you earlier was this concept of running with bad news. And it is something that fits in with SOC and incident reporting. I had a CIO for quite a while at Gilead who sometimes people would joke a bit that he's like, come to me immediately, run with bad news. I don't want people covering things up. And at first when he started talking that way, people kind of maybe thought it was funny, but at that point in our IT organization, we were having lots of outages. We were having lots of challenges. This is way back in the early days. So building that culture of, okay, something's happening and management needs to know about it in IT, like the email servers hiccuping, what do we do? That really blends in very well to IT security and SOC operations and monitoring what's going on. So that philosophy of running with bad news is vital. The fascinating part of that in security operations and in incident management is, who do you go to with that bad news? So the thing about the reporting, the notification, the transparency is first do no harm. Because sometimes with a security incident, if the knowledge of it, especially very early on, goes to the wrong people, it can set off a chain of incidents, a chain of issues that are out of control. People panic or they take the wrong steps. So one of the things that we worked on a lot was making sure the right people to a certain level were informed of anything that was going on. And then how do we manage the information above that level? And as a culture of the team, in daily stand-ups, you're always talking about what anomalies, what's going on, what's the good news, what's the bad news. And that would come usually to my level and my managers. And then I would then filter that up to my manager. And then from there would go up to CISO level. And that was just day in and day out stuff. Now, when we talk about incident reporting, that was another one of the questions that came up was, how do we do effective incident reporting? And the transparency and knowing who the data goes to, like we do in our day-to-day operations, is even more critical when we've got an actual ongoing incident. So we rehearsed incident reporting. We created templates for incident reporting so that it became easier. A lot of times an individual analyst investigating something would have a hard time putting their thoughts down coherently in a timely fashion. So making that as easy as possible to report on that. And then making sure that we had a version of an incident report that could go upstream all the way to board level if necessary, but also a version that would stay within the security organization because it had a lot more practical and functional details. All of those things are time consuming and challenging. So one of the goals of incident reporting and communications is to lower the friction of that, to make it not only habitual, that you always talk about things and report things, you run with bad news, but that you make it as easy as possible and automate that portion of it with templates, with easy to fill out forms. And too much information is sometimes a good thing, and you need to manage that glut of information. But there's been times when incident reporting is not clear and effective, and it does cause more problems, and certainly can lead to bigger breaches and things like that.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's also when you have a moment of panic that not everyone is used to and how to respond. I think that goes back to your point of military background, right? They're a lot more well versed in process what's happening in emergencies. But if you make it a habit with the instant reporting, what to include, you have templates, you make your team's lives easier. When there is that oh shoot moment of, what do we do now? And everyone's panicking, at least they have that kind of muscle memory of, okay, here's what I do next.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Interesting, because some of the other podcast guests have also said at that point, it's, you need to make sure that somebody in your team doesn't go running to 3 levels up and say, "Hey, this is going on," and panics. And at that point, it's really critical of what you say and how you say it, right?
Yeah, yeah, it really can set off alarms. One of the big differences is the difference between an IT incident, like email server down, versus the security incident. In our culture at Gilead, an IT incident, like something being down, is all hands on deck. If it's a P1 incident, everything, everybody jumps in and tries to fix it. Sometimes that's the last thing you want with a security incident. You need it to have a certain level of stealth so that you can really understand it, investigate it, and fix it. And that was a bit of a learning curve for a lot of our IT team, because their idea of an incident is huge break fix moment. Everybody jumps in. A severe IT security incident is often, we need to be very careful who gets involved and pick and choose who gets involved and that type of thing. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, and that also goes back to your idea of speaking the same language with other people who are not familiar with the IT space, right?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I enjoy most was working with really diverse teams on security issues. I worked with a team that does clinical trials. This is where you have a new medication and it's going out to patients in a controlled form so you can see the efficacy of it. And these trials are critical to understanding a medication, but they're also treating patients. They're critical to the patient's health. And there have been times when our partners in those trials, say it's a hospital or a clinic or another organization that supports this clinical trial, had a third-party breach. They had some cybersecurity incident. And working with the teams that do these clinical trials so that they can understand the impact of their trial. They might know that this hospital was down for a week while they had a cybersecurity incident, but how could that impact the validity of your trial? Could the validity of this scientific process be invalidated because of a even external, even third-party IT security incident? And so working with that team over the course of about a year and having them develop their own internal incident response capability to keep a trial from being impacted by an IT security event was just fascinating. I learned so much about how drug trials work and how the team was so committed to patient health and safety in these things. It was part of the mission at Gilead that got me out of bed every morning, was having the sense of we were doing good things. And I certainly look for that in all the jobs that I do. The mission may not be that, human life may not always be the mission, but having something that gets you out of bed in the morning does. And having those kind of interactions with teams is always fascinating.
Well, it certainly sounds like going from aviation and keeping people in planes safe to clinical trials and preserving the motion of really helping people. And sometimes clinical trials, obviously, it's down to the wire, right? So if a trial is successful or not, that might mean the difference between life and death for someone. My father was head of quality assurance at Bayer for a long time, so more familiar with that space. Sounds as though your next gig that you're going to find will be a big mission like that again, because you've had a good, consistent pattern.
For a long time, I felt like I wanted a big mission because I'd had that experience at NASA, and I certainly got that at Gilead. The little startup I was at in between was a predictive analytics for data about heart failure. And it was ability to take large pools of healthcare data and identify heart failure earlier. So again, that was that kind of mission focused thing. As a coincidence, that big data solution came out of the aviation data that I worked with, the methodology that I worked with at NASA. We used the same big data analytics and predictive analytics technology that we'd use in aviation to use on healthcare data. It was a sort of a spin-off from that. So going forward, I can have smaller missions. I could have the mission of helping a company be successful within a certain area. I don't know that I'll find those big missions again. I may if I get fortunate, but I think having an understanding of what gets you out of bed in the morning is important, and being able to do that. I find that with my teams. We have people in England or India, wherever they are, and to have them understand what the company does and what the mission is helps them get out of bed in the morning. And so we spent a lot of time on that. We wanted people to understand what they were doing. And again, not a commodity service, not somebody that just takes a laptop EDR alert, and it could be a laptop at any company in the world. That's fine. That's a commodity alert. But for so much of what you do, it's company specific. And giving people that knowledge of what they're working towards is important.
For sure, because people will be that much more motivated and the team is in sync and working towards as a unit towards a common goal, right? Or mission for that matter. Okay. You implemented innovative security technologies at scale during your time at Gilead. What is your process for evaluating new tools without creating alert fatigue or tool sprawl or any of the other big problems?
One of my specialties at Gilead was I was the endpoint security guy for the 10 years I was there, starting way back in antivirus days and working through very sophisticated EDR platforms, and did a lot of building of new technology, network security, SIM, SOAR. So I did a lot of project work as well. And I think the key thing that we found is the emphasis on building a new technology is procuring it, standing it up on its feet, getting it operational, and then your project's done. And to me, that's half of it. In the project to stand up this new technology, you need to really understand how the company will use it. And in the case of data going into the SOC, it's almost inevitable that what the company provides with this new tool is commodity alerts. And there may be companies where that range of alerts that is out of the box or is recommended by the vendor may be exactly right, or maybe 90% right or 70% right. But then there's other organizations like the ones I've worked in where less than half, to be charitable, of the built-in signals, alerts, logic data out of these tools is useful. And oftentimes, if you turn it on and it starts spitting out information, recovering from that in a SOC level thing, recovering from all this bad data, these spurious alerts, this stuff that we don't care about in an operational phase is really, really challenging. So making sure that the project to stand up the new technology involves making sure that it's not putting out unuseful stuff, that it's not going to cause an impact. And that goes back to what I was saying about team motivation. They've experienced that before. They're like, oh my God, a new set of alerts. This is going to be a nightmare. So for me, certainly there's a whole process of choosing a vendor, choosing a technology, but really standing it up and making it effective, making sure you understand the requirement of what data you need from this, because the vendor will say, look at all this data, look at all these alerts. And then somebody like me looks at it and goes, oh, that one's interesting and that one's interesting, but all the rest,
The noise, the ones that are off
so
base.
I think that's key is to make it valuable. You have to be able to pull out of it in the early stages, doing POCs and doing evaluations. There are times where you can look at a tool and go, this is not customizable enough to be effective for us. It might be perfect for this other company, but for us, we can't get out of it what we want. Or the process of customizing it to meet our needs will cost double what the platform cost in the first place. So I think that's the idea is getting really useful data that helps the SOC rather than hurts it. And it's hard because people get really excited about technology, and the teams that want to implement it usually have been working with the vendor, and the vendor's very excited about it. And you kind of have to break through that. With OT and IoT, which has been a recent focus in the last few years, that's definitely been the case. You get lots of signals out of an OT environment, industrial controls environment, that are hard to understand, and you have to do a lot of tuning on that stuff. Yeah. We went operational with it and had lots and lots of data that just wasn't useful. And of course, then there's people go, look at all this data. Is this all bad? Lots of alarm bells and things like that. So
Causes more harm than good. Yeah, there's a lot to consider that a lot of times vendors like us, we try to, right? But depending on what vendor that we don't think about, that you all go through in terms of your assessment and levers, and at the end of the day, what is a value add versus not, versus in theory, yes, but then there's all this other cleaning up, right?
yeah,
And we always think A plus B, here we go, success. It's just not that easy.
there's a lot of IT security that's like that. Like I mentioned, like, various alerts from laptops, various endpoint detections, various network detections are commodity alerts. They would be the same for any business. And that is the stuff that you want to do well and set aside. But that's kind of the first course. That's the easy stuff. It's the weird stuff that's hard. And it's the weird stuff that will usually bite you. Certainly you want to protect from all the commodity things that happen, all the same things that would happen to a widget manufacturing company and a biopharma. You certainly have to protect against that. But it's all the other stuff, the weird stuff, that is more critical, harder to deal with. And I think that's key, is understanding your company well enough to know what's commodity and what's not. And a vendor's not going to understand that. They're going to say, we detect 98.9% of threats and close them in 90 seconds. Okay, great. But what about this?
Yeah. And have you come across technologies where they have understood industries much better, or the non-commodity alerts in certain spaces to be a true like sticky value add versus just that's nice, but it's not compelling enough?
It's vendor relationships. One of the things we would look for with a new vendor in a POC environment is how well do they want to engage with us and spend the time necessary to understand these things. And we often choose vendors based on that. With an existing legacy vendor, often it is because we've had that relationship. That's often more important. If you're looking at three technology platforms that are in the same vein, the vendor relationship and how much you can work with the vendor long term is probably really tips the scales. In the proof of concepts, we always do these big matrices of requirements and features. How does it meet all these metrics? And then there's always the fuzzy one, a vendor relationship, vendor quality, vendor knowledge, and that can easily tip the scales.
Yeah, makes sense. Looking ahead 5 years, what capability or skill will separate elite security operations teams from average ones?
Knowing man from machine. It's always been the thing all throughout my security career, is understanding your adversary, knowing where the threats are coming from, who's interested in making these threats. As we go towards more automation in the threat landscape, understanding who the humans are behind that, understanding when this is a person doing something versus a fully automated attack. I think that's going to be one of the keys. That sort of adversary awareness is always one of the challenging training aspects of a SOC, so that people will look at something, and it's one of the ways we weed out false positives, because a repetitive task may be just an error, or a repetitive task may be an automated system trying to break in. And so that awareness of adversarial TTPs is a big part of it. And I think as we go along over the next 5 years, really understanding how the adversaries are using automation, using AI, we certainly see that with, you were mentioning earlier, looking at an email. Is this one of these really good spams that, is this excellent spear phishing email? All of the ways that people can use AI and LLMs to be better adversaries, I think that's going to be an ongoing thing for sure.
Couldn't agree more. All right. At the very end, we always ask a question from the last guest. So your question today is, how do you make your SOC a survivable experience that people want to return to?
We've covered a lot of that in this talk, and it definitely comes down to training and engagement. You want people to feel valuable in their jobs. You want people to feel successful. You got to give kudos. You got to regularly acknowledge people's contributions. You got to celebrate successes, and you got to give really good feedback and after action reports on challenges or failures. So you want it to be a place where people feel like their contribution is successful and that they also have opportunities to learn more. It really needs to be a place where people can feel successful. And I think being connected to the organization's mission, knowing about what the company does and why they do it, and what our part of that is, also helps people to really survive the experience. Because again, you have more of a commitment, more of an interest. You're like, this is important work. I'm not just working for a company that makes silly iPhone apps or whatever. Not to denigrate iPhone apps, I use a lot of them myself, but that sense of mission is important.
Yeah. And that brings it full circle versus you have a fantastic company or a fantastic team, but rarely both. If you have a mission at least to tie to and an outstanding team and team culture, you can really make that work and pay dividends.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, Alan, it is your turn. What question would you like to leave for the next SOC leader?
Yes, something that I've worked on a lot over the last few years and that I tend to pose to people is, the question is, how do you handle insider threat? It's a simple, short statement, but some companies have spent a lot of time and energy on this, some haven't. And I think it's a fascinating thing for any organization to be looking at, large or small, is what could that guy down the hall be doing? It's very uncomfortable, There's a lot of it. And I worked on a sort of a insider threat working group for a number of years. And part of our thing with this small group of people was how uncomfortable some of these conversations and decisions are. It's different. It's not some guy in North Korea trying to hack my system. It's the guy down the hall. So the question really is, how do you handle insider threat?
It's a good one. It's always novel to think it's someone external, right? So you often miss the obvious kind of what's happening at the local level. So can't wait to see how someone will answer it. Awesome. Well, Alan, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time and all of the wonderful insights for myself and the audience.
Well, thank you, Ann, and thank you, DropZone, for having this podcast. I think this has been really great. I really appreciate it.
Fantastic. So for future people who'd love to work with you or report to you or find you, how can they connect with you?
Oh, LinkedIn is the best way. I'm Alan Carter on LinkedIn, and you can definitely connect with me there, see a little bit more about my past, and send me messages. And certainly this video will go up on LinkedIn when it's available. So I'm looking forward to reaching out to people through that method as well.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Thanks again.